I have a story to tell you. It started when an artist friend asked for help delivering a large canvas to her studio. As we positioned it on the easel, I suggested we set up a video camera and she turned it on and off as she worked on the painting. Many months later, I was able to edit this into a time-lapse appearance of the painting and then include an interview with Victoria at the painting's premiere.
How does this happen?
Well, in this particular piece, I did make a grid on a map. And it was a map from a book that was written by Native people to document this dam, how it occurred, and what it did to their livelihood.
The painting captures an area in northern Wisconsin overlaying two maps, one before Winter Dam was built and the second after it was completed in 1923. A year later, I was traveling through Chippewa Falls and found the president of the Chippewa Valley Historical Society at his business. To make a long story short, they purchased the painting as a centerpiece for the Native American exhibit in their newly built Chippewa Valley History Center. This exhibit made me curious. It talked of people living here before the European trappers, loggers, and settlers arrived. I was soon to meet one of these Native American descendants.
Well, look at Columbus. Columbus was a man who was looking for new markets. He thought he was going to India. And when he saw the people on Hispaniola, he was lost and he called them Indians. And we got a little joke in Indian country that we're glad he wasn't looking for turkey.
Marge introduced me to her sister May, who took this rallying step to connect me to the Ojibwe language. I soon learned that most of the names of northern Wisconsin landmarks come from the Ojibwe.
Wisconsin.
Wish.
Wish.
Two eyes.
Yes.
Sound
Okay.
like a long T in English.
Okay.
Wishkun.
Wisconsin.
And a short I, with just
Sit.
one I, is just like it is in
Sit.
English.
Yeah. Wisconsin.
Yes. Wishkun Sizibe.
Okay. And then the French say Wisconsin.
Maybe.
And the
Yeah,
English say Wisconsin somehow.
When the French came, they asked the women, "What do you call yourselves?" And they said, "Oh, Chippewa." And they thought the women said Chippewa. And so they wrote that down. Even our tribe right now is called the Lake Superior Chippewa.
The language class quickly turned into a history lesson. Well, history for me and family heritage for them.
Which one's here? I mean, Michael Cadet and Madeline, when they came down the Chippewa River, there was no one here really except the natives that were camped on the Chippewa River.
Yes.
And that was a good place to make a trading post, so he did.
Marge Hebring and May Wilcombe, Ojibwe members, invited me to partake in a journey through the early history of their ancestral lands.
And that's the spot that God forgot.
But then to see how all these trading posts became named, the town was named after, we're going to go to Cadet Falls. There was a falls at each one of these places.
Okay.
And the reason for that was because you're coming down the river and you don't want to go over the falls with your canoe and lose all your goods. So you had to take everything out, take the canoe out, all the stuff that was in it, and put it around the falls. And everywhere where people had to get out, it was a nice place for a little convenience store.
Back in the 1700s, the arrival of French fur traders to the Great Lakes area forged a unique connection with the Ojibwe. These traders sought the Ojibwe's expert hunting skills, and in exchange, the Ojibwe received guns, knives, cloth, liquor, and other manufactured goods. This exchange reshaped their lives, altering their nomadic way of existence. Yet the Ojibwe welcomed these traders, for the French embraced their culture and learned their language. Among these Frenchmen, Jean-Baptiste Cadet stood out. He married Athanasie, a proud Ojibwe of the Catfish clan. Their union was a testament to the harmony between two distinct cultures. By the 1760s, the British began expanding into the Great Lakes region, constructing forts as part of their colonization efforts. Their approach was exactly the opposite of the French, who had been there decades before. Whereas the French strategy was to embrace the natives, The British strategy was to displace them.
Because the French had a more friendly relationship with the natives. They married into their families. They wore their clothing. They used canoes. All of that.
In response, the Native Americans organized an audacious attack on several British forts, including Fort Mackinac. On June 4th, 1763, as British King George III celebrated his 25th birthday, the Ojibwe executed a brilliant ruse. A lacrosse game was staged outside the fort, drawing the British soldiers to the spectacle. Amidst the game, the athletes swiftly transformed into warriors, armed by Ojibwe spectators. Only a handful of British soldiers were held as prisoners. Remarkably, Marge and Sylvia's ancestors, Jean-Baptiste Cadotte and Athanasi, played a vital role in resolving the aftermath of the Fort Mackinac battle. They even negotiated the release of Alexander Henry, a former prisoner, who would become instrumental in establishing the fur trade across the Great Lakes.
This is Jean-Baptiste, being from at Sault Ste. Marie, his son Michael, who was at Chippewa Falls, Michael Jr., who was born here at Cadotte, and then Geneva, his daughter, and Geneva's daughter Sophie, and Sophie's son Frank, and our mother Caroline.
What I'm thinking is the whole area is somehow connected back to this tree.
In 1865, Robert Mariner built a dam at Cadotte Falls and named the village Cadotte, paying homage to the French Indian fur traders who left an indelible mark on northern Wisconsin's rich history. It was a bittersweet moment.
Dams are a good thing and a bad thing. One of the things, before we had dams, there was not a lot of control over the river, and there were good things and bad things that happened out of that. So the landscape, which is alluvial in a lot of places along the Chippewa, which is a windy, shallow river, so it gets flooded occasionally, and that adds a lot of nutrients to the soil. So, I mean, this is why you grow a lot of things in the delta, right? So a flood is a good thing. A flood destroys houses. That's a bad thing. An uncontrolled river is bad for a regimented, civilized society because it will fill up your basement and then you'll ruin all your stuff. So that makes dams good in that way. You know, our biggest floods were on the Chippewa River were in 1880 and 1884. We've never had a flood that approached those since. And that's because we have more dams on the Chippewa. So they're great at that sort of thing. They produce power, and people like power. People need power. We would all die out in the cold because we've forgotten to live without power. So that's a good thing if you want people to survive in the winter in Wisconsin. We can't do that. We could do it 150 years ago. We can't do it anymore. So that's a good thing. But dams also destroy areas. They destroy wetlands, and so that's a bad thing. So we've changed forever the landscape and the kinds of landscape that people and animals use. So there are critters that we used to have a lot of around here that we don't have a lot of anymore because they were wetland creatures. And a lot of that is because we've filled up with impoundments. We've filled up a lot of wetlands that existed, so that's a bad thing. So for every good thing that a dam does, it does a bad thing, and for every bad thing it does a good thing.
In 1921, the Federal Power Commission granted a license to the Wisconsin and Minnesota Power and Light Company for a dam constructed on the Chippewa River. The dam was completed in 1923 and provided hydroelectric power and flood control to the area, creating a 15,300-acre reservoir with 233 miles of shoreline. Known as the Chippewa Flowage, this watery area with about 200 islands has become one of Wisconsin's largest inland lakes, homeland to the Lakota Band of the Chippewa Indians. The band never approved of the creation of the Chippewa Flowage and lost their post village, burial grounds, and wild rice beds to the newly created lake. Today, this area of spectacular natural scenery attracts not only many nature lovers, but thousands of anglers to the abundant fishing waters. After my interesting conversation with Marge and May, they suggested I visit the flowage to experience it for myself, to visit both a resort and the LCO reservation, to engage with locals, to learn more about the current state of affairs. I sensed that the combination of the Ojibwe and European heritages had enabled them to overcome significant challenges, seize great opportunities, and thrive. My first stop was at the Indian Trail Resort, where I met the owners, John and Brenda Detloff.
Right. This is one of the most original bars on the flowage. A lot of the older resorts remodeled their bars or tore down their original bars and built brand new ones that are very nice, but you just don't have that nostalgia.
So when we moved here, his cabin was almost 100 years old, and that was in 1972. Because his name was Chizua. People call him Chizio because it was just kind of a short and easier version. But Chizua was allotted this land in 1881. The allotment of land first started in 1881 as a result of the Treaty of 1854. And it took that long for the land to finally get surveyed and divvied up and finally assigned to each individual Indian. Before that, Indians never owned property, they just occupied it and used it.
The dam, this water is here because of the dam. So if the dam wasn't there, it would still be rivers coming through here, and you couldn't even do this. There's no way in the world you could run your boat here.
I'd heard that this past summer the resort owners engaged in various activities to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of Winter Dam. Each resort sold souvenirs, with the proceeds contributing towards the $7,000 requested by the DNR for muskie growth. I purchased a pint glass for enjoying one of my favorite Wisconsin beverages. However, I soon found out not everyone was buying these souvenirs.
Our story is pretty sorrowful. Man, it's getting kicked around and killed and land stolen. And our reservation, we finally got our reservation, and then the whites flooded it. They built a dam and flooded our reservation here. We lost thousands of acres of property, and I mean, it's just one sorrowful tale after another. The wild rice was destroyed. We have never had wild rice, and really, that's why we were here, because of those valuable rice beds along that riverway system. There was like, if you had flown over back then in the 1800s, you would have seen something like this, which was just a myriad of rivers and streams and tributaries, and it was just filled with rice. And that's why we were here, because we had that resource. And rice to us was our blood. It's what kept us going. Past year, we all got together and we're planning this big commemoration event, which is coming up on August 12th. And when we held our first planning meetings, we held them right here. And what happened? A bunch of the non-Indian resort owners from the Chippewa flowage, they all showed up here. And, they rolled up their sleeves with us and said, let's go to work. Let's make a big commemoration. And so then as the New Post people came in, again, it's way up on the other side of the res, and that's the village that was created when the original Old Post people were getting ready to move out because they knew the flood was going to come and destroy them. So their descendants now have taken over the planet, which is what we wanted. We wanted them to assume the planning for this. In the end, first thing they did was get these white people out of here. We don't want anything to do with these resorters, and that's what they told their Faith and I. We don't want them involved in this at all. We see it as a memorial, as a commemoration of a tragic thing that happened. They see it as a celebration.
What we have to do today, we're remembering those of our relatives who lived more than 100 years ago and had their whole lifeway changed 100 years ago by the creation of this dam, by the stoppage of our beautiful water that supplied our people with so much wild rice that our people were so healthy from eating that rice 400 years ago for many, many years.
Wow, was I wrong. I thought this history of being connected in so many ways for so long would have built a partnership. But it's clear this 100-year anniversary event triggered a true separation of opinion and feelings. Documenting history is not enough to make the wrongs of history go away. Maybe this is more common than we think and a basis for much of the unrest in our world.
We could probably talk for hours about this because it's actually interesting that you're asking these kinds of things because you're sort of representing that viewpoint of like where things are at, right?
You know, I'm old enough to remember a time where people would disagree with each other and then go on. You know, and right now in this very moment, in these last few years, these last 5 years, say, we're in this moment where we can't. You know, we disagree and then we can't go on. We stew in it. We saute ourselves in it.
But again, it goes back to, you know, if those old people were like, you have to go along to get along, is that really getting along? Because it's the same thing, like, what would have happened to my grandfather if he had started walking into the front door, right? So you could say like, hey, we're getting along. Really? Like that's getting along? How is that getting along? Because, you know, there's this unspoken thing that there are lines that you can't cross, right? So this goes back again to like people's perceptions of how things are and not even understanding their own history and making assumptions about how or why things are the way that they are.
So I took art because I knew I was creative, and I'm an American Indian Studies minor, and I started learning all this American Indian history. And I became very angry at first, things that have been done to natives, and I find that happens a lot with native students. They don't know their history, they don't know their culture, they come to the university and they start learning about all of that, and they get angry too, and I don't blame them.
I went to boarding school, and from years of being in boarding school, well, the years after, maybe I should say the years after boarding school, I carried around a lot of anger. But I think I worked my way through that and got that result. But I was pissed off, you know. I was looking back at all that and just being really angry at people.
All Native people, it's like we're like sleeping next to this grizzly bear, and there's nothing we can do about it because our fates are tied, right? And it's whatever that bear decides that they want to do, like we're stuck with it because we don't have our influence to be able to like point out this is not a good situation.
I just had a guy over here share with me his great-grandfather grew up over there in that village. And he was in high ground, so the power company officials told him not to worry, that the water would destroy the village, but it would only reach to about here, right?
Yes, okay.
And it didn't just reach to there, it went up to his house. So what he had to do was, this old man, George Fleming, you know, who had a place over there was the west side of the old village. And what he had to do was he had to, realizing that the flood was coming higher, gonna take his house up, he had to go back and dig up his parents. They were buried behind the house. So he was back there, you know, digging, and finally he realized water was up. He had to go get a bucket, you know, a metal bucket. He went over, ran over, and found one and brought it back, and had to dig up the remains of his parents and put them in the bucket to move them over to high ground.
Like, I think being Ojibwe means to be like the ultimate optimist, because, you know, in spite of knowing all of the history and all of these terrible things that had happened, some of it isn't that long ago, we're still here.